Hi there, my name is Nina Goradia. I'm a Somatic Experiencing practitioner on the non-dual path. I've come across the idea of integration a long time ago because it's an integral part of Somatic Experiencing. And as many of you know who work with trauma or who have been following the channel, what we're doing when we have traumas is we're trying to integrate those experiences. What was pushed away from us because we didn't have capacity to feel through the emotions that arose with trauma, then it feels separate from us, and it causes this feeling of emptiness because all this energy has been shunted off or compartmentalized. And so we're trying to pull in those emotions and welcome them, accept them, allow them so they can come back into the whole and not be pushed away and have this inner fight within us. So we can be at inner peace when we have all these emotions welcome and free to flow within the oceanic experience of our bodies. And so this integration concept has been extremely intriguing for me for a very long time. And then I came across a video by a man named Christian Sundberg, and I have his book here. It's called A Walk in the Physical. And his story is really incredible. I'll link an interview of his over here. But he remembers his pre-birth experience. So before his soul incarnated in this body on this planet. And for those of you that this might sound really odd, there are many, many people like this. And I did a video that is kind of similar. I'll put it here about your soul's plan. And it's so many people who've been able to access this kind of information. And they're all saying the same thing that people are saying in near-death experiences. It's really fascinating. But with Christian, he remembers before the veil came over him, because he was allowed to have a little window where he could remember and he didn't fully forget. And what he says is that we are here on Earth to integrate experiences. That's what we're here to do. And so when I heard this, I was really fascinated again. And the integration concept really resonates for me. So how do we integrate an experience? How do we do that practically? Well, if I think about it, whatever happens in the external world, whatever I'm experiencing that internally as emotions, right? Isn't that my internal experience, my sensory perceptions? It might also be my perceptions mentally, right? My filters through which I'm looking through the world. It could be emotions, traumas. It could be energy. And that can be thought of as in different ways. So wherever our attention goes, energy flows. So you can think of it, wherever I put my attention, I'm allowing my energy to help me do that. So that's another way that I started thinking about integration. So I want to break all of these ways down, but my premise, my hypothesis for this life is that we're here to integrate perceptions, emotions, experiences, and energy. And so I want to talk about these individually in detail. So when we think about this with trauma, in the paradigm of PTSD, what often happens when we have so much stimulation and not enough capacity to feel all of it through, and what happens is that energy gets saved in the body as stored patterns of emotions, stored muscle holding patterns or organs or tissues. They hold on to that energy so that we can feel through it later. Now, when it comes to integration, we want to allow those emotions back to the whole, as I've already mentioned, because they get compartmentalized. They also get compartmentalized mentally. And so we might not even remember something because it was so much and we pushed that memory away. So these compartmentalizations that occur with trauma, it's because there's mind splitting, and it's metaphorically, of course, that I'm talking about this. The mind will split into coping strategies to help protect us from feeling emotions. It goes into ego building mode, which is all these mental strategies to help us not feel, to help us survive the moment, to help us survive, a period of time where there were no other resources to feel through. So when we have this, our energy gets shunted off into these various mental compartmentalizations, which always correspond with physical compartmentalizations of this holding pattern, this holding of energy. This divides our attention and energy into these strategies instead of our energy being available to us and undivided in the present moment. And so, what are some ways that we can start to integrate this energy back in so that we can have more bandwidth, so that we can have more ability and space to respond to the present moment rather than going into a habitual coping strategy or reaction? So, why are we here to integrate? What is the reason for that? So, as I've been thinking about this for quite some time and been on the non-dual path, which is a path of oneness, it's non-dual is, not two, Advaita Vedanta. The truth is oneness. So I think that's why we are here to integrate, to see the truth that we cannot be separate. We are part of all that is. Everything is oneness, and I will make future videos on this. So we cannot be separate. We can feel separate, and that happens with traumas. And some of you are familiar with my trauma flow chart. This is a different version of it, but it's very much the same concept. But as we have a thought and we believe it, it creates an emotional experience in our body in the present moment. As we're afraid of it or resist it, suppress it, we push it down into saved holding patterns in our bodies. And so we need to work with it in several ways to help release all of this. But this is how the ego works. This is how attachments work. This is how learning works. We're none of this. This is the ego program. We're the white space in the background. And so when we start to realize that I can't be separate, I can only feel separate if I'm identifying with my thoughts or my emotions or my story. I'm identifying as the separate self identity, which is the ego identity. So this is where we can experience the illusion of being separate. And this identification with false beliefs, with our stories, with our traumas, you have to work through it at the place where you're at, acknowledge the story, do all those things, but eventually we want to get to the place where we transcend it, because the identification with the things that happen to us, what it does is it shunts off our life force energy that we want available to us. Anything I identify with, I'm basically saying I am what happened to me. And who we are is never defined by what happens to us. We're so much greater than that. So knowing our identity is so important in overcoming trauma, feeling peace. But I want to give this other reason that this helps us regain our life force energy that got split off with these compensations, with these compartmentalizations in mind and body. So as we realize the truth that I can't be separate, I am all of this is in me. And again, I'll expand on this in future videos so it's more clear. We start to feel the wholeness of all that we are. We start to experience ourselves without the limitations we normally impose on ourselves. And I want to talk about practical ways that we can start to do this integration work. So one very practical way, of course, is the somatic experiencing work. That's what the whole channel is about, how to integrate, and that is allowing and accepting emotions, disproving thoughts, not identifying with emotions, not identifying with thoughts. Doing all that is integration work. But there are more ways we can do this, and I want to give you an example of a well-known saint from 20th century India, Ramana Maharshi, how he did this. So he actually was able to have surgery without anesthesia. He refused the anesthesia. And, of course, he was already enlightened and he has a lot of bandwidth. He was able to handle all of that. So this is not for the average person to jump into extreme practices, but it kind of shows how his way of life was integration. So the surgery went on for hours, and then they told him, and he was just talking to somebody, and they came up and told him that it's over. And he goes, "What? It's over?" And they're like, "Yeah, didn't you feel the pain?" And he's like, yeah, I did. It was like 100 chilies ground up in the wound. But even that pain is not apart from me. Now, this sentence is basically saying I can't be separate. I can't be separate from any life experience. I can't be separate from sensory perceptions. I can't be. Now, to be clear, this is at the highest level of awareness. And I'm going to link a video here if you want to go into depth about this, about self-realization. I did an interview with my teacher's other student, Aloshin, where we talk about the different levels of awareness. I'll briefly say something here about it. So at this first level, we are identified with everything that's an illusion. We're identified with things that we're not. We think we are, our body, our gender, our race, what other people think of us. And yeah, on a practical level, I'm playing the role of a person who is female, Indian descent, a counselor. I'm playing this role. Okay, but it's not who I am. It's not my highest identity, which we can think of as soul or awareness or infinite consciousness. There's many different words for this. So that's one level where I think that's all I am. And so this next level is when I start realizing, wait a minute, I can't be my thoughts because they come and go and I'm staying the same. Can't be my emotions, they come and go, but I'm still here. Can't be my body. It has all new cells every 7 years. It looks completely different from when it was a baby. And when I die, the body will be here and no one's going to say Nina's still here. I can't be the body. What am I? What is that thread, right? So we start realizing, oh, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. Can't be anything I look at. Because if I look at something, who's the one looking? I always have to be the one looking. Okay, so this intermediate level, I'm realizing what I'm not. And then I realize, oh, that one thread that's always there is awareness. I'm aware and I'm present. I'm aware and I'm here. That's always been there. Okay, so then I start thinking I am that awareness. But that is still a form of ego. It's the smallest form. Okay, so once I keep settling there, that's when we're identifying with the sense of being. And so as I stay there, that will start to recede. And then I will actually go to the third level, which is I'm nothing as I look internally, and I'm everything as I look externally, because there's no more ego, right? Or the ego can lay down as we keep dissolving it. It can pop back up at times with attachments and it can lay back down. And you can see very clearly, you can see who you are. And so when this is happening, when the ego is dissolved enough or it's laid down, there's nothing here. There's no ego. There's no individual separate self. So that's what some people are referring to when they say I. That's the little I of the ego. Big I is the self, capital S. And so when there's no ego here, you can see that I am nothing. Like there's nothing here. There's no individual separate self. And because there's no individual separate self, when you look outward, you don't feel separate from it. You feel like you're all of it. You're just completely connected. And so you might not even be thinking this, but there's no boundaries that you perceive. In fact, your attention is no longer even localized to your separate mind-body unit. The attention can become floating, and it's not localized to any object. It really is identified with everything. So you don't want to skip from here to here, because it can be very confusing. You want to know what you're not, so that when you start identifying that you're everything, it's not in a clingy way. It's just in an equal way. Everything you're identified with equally. So you're not owned by it. I wanted to explain that because this integration process, you might not be able to go direct with all of it. Some of it you might need to still separate. Okay, I'm not that, I'm not that. So the way you can practically apply this in your daily life is to do this, especially in the moments that you want to run away from your emotional experience. So we want to kind of see, wait, am I dissociating because I don't want to experience something, or it's too much? Or am I going into some sort of habit, some sort of coping strategy because I don't want to experience? And in those moments, you can try to find your experience that you're running from, and you can say, even this is not apart from me. And I did this a few weeks ago. I was so ill one evening, like so ill, I could hardly move my body or even think. And I just had to go lay down. But it was so uncomfortable, so painful. And I remembered this story about Ramana Maharshi by grace. And I said, even this is not apart from me. And immediately, because I was no longer resisting my experience, I accepted it. All the suffering came off me. I was still in the same physical state, but I wasn't resisting it anymore. My suffering came down so much, and it was completely bearable. I was able to go to sleep, woke up normal the next morning. And so this is really powerful. And now keep in mind, suffering is not the same as pain. So pain, we're going to experience pain. We have pain receptors. We're in a body. We experience sensations. Pain is a fact of life. Suffering is all the thoughts and resistance I'm having about this pain. So that's what came off of me. And that was incredible, because then the pain was very much manageable. It's really not as bad as we think in many situations. So that is one example of how you can do that when something arises that normally you'd run from. Just try that. Okay, I'll do that habit in a minute, but first I'm going to see if I can integrate this experience, my internal experience that is arising, that's kind of getting triggered from this external experience. And so we welcome it, allow it. And where this can be especially powerful is when we think about our traumas, especially the times where we did not give ourselves compassion, or we abandoned ourselves in some way. We were disappointed with ourselves, we judged ourselves. And you can think of that former self of yours where a certain time that happened, there's a trauma and someone wasn't there for you, you weren't there for you, something like that. And then you welcome that part of yourself. Even that part is not separate from me. And so when you do that, you're probably going to feel the emotions associated with that. You're welcoming them. It's another way to allow them. And then try to extend some compassion for the feelings. So when you do that, you can do it for the physical feelings, but you can also do that for whatever conceptual way you might be thinking of your former self. So whatever judgments are there, now you're learning how to soften those judgments and think about compassion as well as extending it to the physical emotions, because whatever emotions are arising when you think of a past trauma and your past self, that's your past self communicating to you in real time about how they felt. And it's doing so emotionally with the emotion. It's just a different language. And so traumas happen when we don't get compassion in a given moment, when there's, compassion is needed when there's a big trauma. And so you want to give yourself what you didn't get. And when the emotions come up, that's the opportunity. They're coming up and looking to be met. A need is wanting to be met, compassion. So as you meet these wounds with compassion, they heal, they dissolve. With the judgment, they duck down under again. You push them down further. So this is one very practical way to integrate all those former selves. This is not apart from me. There's also ways that you can do this for things you wouldn't even imagine. So many enlightened people say that they don't feel separate from anything. As I mentioned here, you feel connected to everything, so even inanimate objects. And it's kind of interesting. I did this as an experiment. So I'm not apart from the earth. I'm not apart from other people. I'm not apart from, various inanimate objects, and just to see how that feels. And it felt integrating. It felt like more and more energy came because the identification of who I was expanded so much. Now, keep in mind, I've done a lot of work at that intermediate level. So when I'm doing it here, I'm not getting confused by it. Because if I say, oh, I'm the same as other people, but I haven't done any work, I might go into codependency, which is down here, identifying as other people in unhealthy ways. So we need to kind of work through some of these steps. But you can pick which ones you feel ready for and try them on. And if there's still some codependency there and you say I'm the same as other people, it's not going to feel good. It's not going to feel comforting. It's going to feel like an attachment, like a hook. So that's one way you can check. So with the earth stuff, I'm going to make a video about this in a couple of weeks, because the earth is something that has gotten on my radar the last few weeks in a very strong way. And I heard somebody say that it is like our cosmic body. So see, here we've got this body, but it's made of all the same elements as the earth. We're not separate from the earth. And there's so many ways we can integrate with the earth. And I've been doing this the last week in a very strong way. And I can't tell you how my energy has just gone through the roof. And I'm going to share that in a couple of weeks. So I want to say that, when I say integrate perception, integrate experiences, integrate emotions, and integrate energy, I think we can integrate energy from the earth. We can also integrate the energy that we would have lost through our attention. So again, if I'm externally seeking, always looking outside for happiness, I'm losing energy. If I turn that attention inward, then I'm internalizing my consciousness, and then I'm allowing the energy to build up, and I need that energy to help me in a lot of ways. We do need energy to awaken. That's my experience. Maybe other people have done it without that, but I've noticed that in all the years that I've experienced illness or fatigue, and I kept learning, I kept growing, I kept working on it, but sometimes there wasn't enough energy that needed to raise up in order to kind of open up the consciousness. And then in times where I had a lot of energy, I was able to channel that appropriately to open up. And so I want to share how the earth can give us energy and the integration of that. And then finally, the integration of perception. So that's going to be, recognizing that my perception is oftentimes going to be limited by my filters, my unhealed traumas, and my projections, how I see the world. So if I pull this chart up again, if I have saved patterns here of traumas, and say like I was mugged, so I'm kind of, afraid of, is that person safe? Is that person safe? So this is going to cause certain thoughts like that to arise. But if my trauma is I was abandoned, then I might have thoughts that say, do they like me? Are they going to leave? Right? So I have to be aware of what are my filters and my projections and how I'm seeing the world. And I need to start integrating my perception. And again, that can be done just thinking, oh, even that is not apart from me, even that is not separate from me. Whenever we're having this tendency to judge or divide, now that doesn't mean you don't have discernment. It doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. We need all these things. They're very appropriate. But in terms of how you're kind of shunting off your energy and processing, these are the ways to integrate. But you still need to behave in ways that are respecting other people's boundaries, asking for your boundaries to be respected. We need to do that. But in the way that we are kind of seeing the world and our place in it, as we're integrating more and more, it's going to start feeling like we're all of it, and it's okay, and it's wonderful, and that we can't be alone. I think that's the icing on the cake of all this, is realizing I can't be alone because I'm all of this. I'm going to make a video about that too. So if I can't be separate, I'm a part of this. All of you are children here on earth and are rightfully allowed here and belong here. And we all share the same consciousness. That's the cool part, the oneness. So even if I was alone, well, then I'm everything. So if I'm alone, it's all me, right? So we can't be alone. We can only feel alone. And also, I understand some people might be feeling very lonely. There are ways to integrate that, though, so that you don't feel alone. Okay, I'm going to stop here because I know this is a wide variety of ideas, all under the umbrella of integration. I hope this piqued your interest and I hope this helps. I'm curious if any of you tried this exercise, saying even this is not apart from me. And I'm curious if any of you have other ways that you integrate. Please feel free to share, and I'll see you next time. Take care.